Hello. Welcome to Frankenstein Tea, a daily program from the Island Free Library. With me, I think that was a rhyme in there. I am Kristen. I'm the director of the Island Free Library, and I welcome you to Frankenstein Tea. This is a daily program for adult listeners. This was part of how we stayed connected to our patrons and to our family and friends, and sort of carried forward through shelter in place. And we continue to do this program because we continue to be living through a pandemic. And so welcome. This is a chance. This program happens every day. 99% of the time it is live. I am live today. Once in a while I record. I might record tomorrow or the next day. Those are my, two kind of days off from work, scheduled work. I usually work those days, not so much tomorrow. And sometimes I'm live from home. But anyway, just so you know. And yesterday I read something and it seemed to have not recorded or have happened, or something went on. The internet was kaflooey. And so I'm going to try again today. I'm back in my normal spot where the internet is usually decent. And I'm going to read from the same book, although I'm not going to read the same story. I'm going to read from the same book as yesterday because I like this book, Weird Women. Classic supernatural fiction by groundbreaking female writers, 1852 to 1923. I'm going to read a story from here, and then we'll see. Well, hi, Dad. I'm not sure how to carry forward because I'm not sure everybody heard the story yesterday. I know my dad didn't. So either I'll make a recording for you, special Dad, or maybe I'll read that second half after this story. Not sure what's going to happen. I'm often not sure what's going to happen here at Frankenstein Tea, although I do plan it, and I do pre-read many things to be prepared for this program. And I liked this book yesterday, and I liked it again today when I was reading from it, so I'm going to read from it again today. And I should say, I should do it correctly here. This is edited by Lisa Morton and Leslie S. Klinger. Weird Women, Classic Supernatural Fiction by Groundbreaking Female Writers, 1852 to 1923. On the front flap here, it says, while the 19-year-old Mary Shelley is hailed as the first modern writer of horror, the success of her immortal Frankenstein undoubtedly inspired dozens of female authors to write their own evocative, chilling tales. And that is what these two editors did, was put together other chilling tales from these early 19th century. Early female horror writers. That's what I'm trying to say. So it is published by Pegasus Books in 2020. So again, yesterday I read something and I'm not sure it all came across. So we'll either return to that later today in the program, or perhaps tomorrow at another time, or perhaps the day after. Not sure how that will go. But for today's episode, fresh start here, I'm going to read Louisa May Alcott, and her story in this book is called Lost in a Pyramid, or The Mummy's Curse. Lost in a Pyramid, or The Mummy's Curse. Okay, welcome. Enjoy. And what are these, Paul? Asked Evelyn, opening a tarnished gold box and examining its contents curiously. Seeds of some unknown Egyptian plant, replied Forsyth, with a sudden shadow on his dark face as he looked down at the 3 scarlet grains lying in the white hand lifted to him. Where did you get them? Asked the girl. That is a weird story which will only haunt you if I tell it, said Forsyth, with an absent expression that strongly excited the girl's curiosity. Please tell it. I like weird tales, and they never trouble me. Oh, do tell it. Your stories are always so interesting, she cried, looking up with such a pretty blending of entreaty and command in her charming face that refusal was impossible. You'll be sorry for it, and so shall I, perhaps. I warn you beforehand that harm is foretold to the possessor of those mysterious seeds, said Forsyth, smiling, even while he knit his black brows and regarded the blooming creature before him with a fond yet foreboding glance. Tell on! I'm not afraid of these pretty atoms, she answered with an imperious nod. To hear is to obey. Let me read the facts, and then I will begin, returned Forsyth, pacing to and fro with the far-off look of one who turns to the pages of the past. Evelyn watched him a moment and then returned to her work, or play rather, for the task seemed well suited to the vivacious little creature, half child, half woman. While in Egypt, commenced Forsyth slowly, I went one day with my guide and Professor Niles to explore the Cheops. Niles had a mania for antiquities of all sorts and forgot time, danger, and fatigue in the ardor of his pursuit. We rummaged up and down the narrow passages, half choked with dust and close air, reading inscriptions on the walls, stumbling over shattered mummy cases, or coming face to face with some shriveled specimen perched like a hobgoblin on the little shelves where the dead used to be stowed away for ages. I was desperately tired after a few hours of it and begged the professor to return. But he was bent on exploring certain places and would not desist. We had but one guide, so I was forced to stay. But Jumal, my man, seeing how weary I was, proposed to us to rest in one of the larger passages while he went to procure another guide for Niles. We consented, and assuring us that we were perfectly safe if we did not quit the spot, Jamal left us, promising to return speedily. The professor sat down to take notes of his researches, and stretching myself on the soft sand, I fell asleep. I was roused by that indescribable thrill which instinctively warns us of danger, and springing up, I found myself alone. One torch burned faintly where Jamal had struck it, but Niles and the other light were gone. A dreadful sense of loneliness oppressed me for a moment. Then I collected myself and looked well about me. A bit of paper was pinned to my hat, which lay near me. I've gone back a little to refresh my memory on certain points. Don't follow me till Jumal comes. I can find my way back to you, for I have a clue. Sleep well and dream gloriously of the pharaohs. N.N. I laughed at first over the old enthusiast, then felt anxious, then restless, and finally resolved to follow him, for I discovered a strong cord fastened to a fallen stone and knew that this was the clue he spoke of. Leaving a line for Jumal, I took my torch and retraced my steps, following the cord along the winding ways. I often shouted, but received no reply, and pressed on, hoping at each turn to see the old man poring over some musty relic of antiquity. Suddenly the cord ended, and lowering my torch, I saw that the footsteps had gone on. Rash fellow, he'll lose himself to a certainty, I thought, really alarmed now. As I paused, a faint call reached me, and I answered it, waited, shouted again, and a still fainter echo replied. Niles was evidently going on, misled by the reverberations of the low passages. No time was to be lost, and forgetting myself, I stuck my torch in the deep sand to guide me back to the clue, and ran down the straight path before me, whooping like a madman as I went. I did not mean to lose sight of the light, but in my eagerness to find Niles, I turned from the main passage and, guided by his voice, hastened on. His torch soon gladdened my eyes, and the clutch of his trembling hands told me what agony he had suffered. "Let us get out of this horrible place at once," he said, wiping the great drops off his forehead. "Come, we're not far from the clue. I can soon reach it, and then we are safe." But as I spoke, a chill passed over me, for a perfect labyrinth of narrow paths lay before my hasty passage. I followed the tracks in the sand till I fancied we must be near my light. No glimmer appeared, however, and kneeling down to examine the footprints nearer, I discovered, to my dismay, that I had been following the wrong ones, for among those marked by a deep boot heel were prints of bare feet. We had had no guide there, and Jamal wore sandals. Rising, I confronted Niles with the one despairing word, "Lost," as I pointed from the treacherous sand to the fast waning light. I thought the old man would be overwhelmed, but, to my surprise, he grew quite calm and steady, thought a moment, and then went on, saying quietly, "Other men have passed here before. Ere they lead toward great passages, where one's way is easily found." On we went, bravely, till a misstep threw the professor violently to the ground with a broken leg and nearly extinguished the torch. It was a horrible predicament, and I gave up all hope as I sat beside the poor fellow, who lay exhausted with fatigue, remorse, and pain, for I would not leave him. "Paul," he said suddenly, "if you will not go on, there is one more effort we can make. I remember hearing that a party lost as we are saved themselves by building a fire. The smoke penetrated further than sound or light, and the guide's quick wit understood the unusual mist. He followed it and rescued the party. Make a fire and trust to Jamal." "A fire without wood?" I began, but he pointed to a shelf behind me, which had escaped me in the gloom, and on it I saw a slender mummy case. I understood him, for these dry cases, which lie about in hundreds, are freely used as firewood. Reaching up, I pulled it down, believing it to be empty, but as it fell, it burst open, and out rolled a mummy. Accustomed as I was to such sights, it startled me a little, for danger had unstrung my nerves. Laying the little brown chrysalis aside, I smashed the case, lit the pile with my torch, and soon a light cloud of smoke drifted down the 3 passages which diverged from the cell-like place where we had paused. While busied with the fire, Niles, forgetful of interest of a man whose ruling passion was strong even in death. Come and help me unroll this. I have always longed to be the first to see and secure the curious treasure." Beginning to unfold the outer coverings from which a strange, aromatic odor came. I lent a hand, wondering as I worked if this dark, ugly thing had ever been a lovely, soft eyed Egyptian girl. From the fibrous folds of the wrappings dropped precious gums and spices, which half intoxicated us with their potent breath, antique coins, and a curious jewel or two, which Niles eagerly examined. All the bandages but one were cut off at last, and a small head laid bare, round which still hung great plaits of what had once been luxuriant hair. The shriveled hands were folded on the breast, and clasped in them lay that gold box. Ah, cried Evelyn, dropping it from her rosy palm with a shudder. Nay, don't reject the poor little mummy's treasure. I never have quite forgiven myself for stealing it or for burning her, said Forsyth, painting rapidly, as if the recollection of that experience lent energy to his hand. Burning her? Oh, Paul, what do you mean? Asked the girl, sitting up with a face full of excitement. I'll tell you. While busied with Madame la Momie, our fire had burned low, for the dry case went like tinder. A faint, far-off sound made our hearts leap, and Niles cried out, Pile on the wood! Jumal is tracking us! Don't let the smoke fall now, or we are lost. There is no more wood. The case was very small and is all gone, I answered, tearing off such of my garments as would burn readily and piling them upon the embers. Niles did the same, but the light fabrics were quickly consumed and made no smoke. Burn that, commanded the professor, pointing to the mummy. I hesitated a moment. Again came the faint echo of a horn. Life was dear to me. A few dry bones might save us, and I obeyed him in silence. A dull blaze sprung up, and a heavy smoke rose from the burning mummy, rolling in volumes through the low passages and threatening to suffocate us with its fragrant mist. My brain grew dizzy. The light danced before my eyes. Strange phantoms seemed to people the air, and, in the act of asking Niles why he gasped and looked so pale, I lost consciousness. Evelyn drew a long breath and put away the scented toys from her lap as if their odor oppressed her. Forsyth's swarthy face was all aglow with the excitement of his story, and his black eyes glittered as he added with a quick laugh, That's all. Jamal found and got us out, and we both forswore pyramids for the rest of our days. But the box, how came you to keep it? Asked Evelyn, eyeing it askance as it lay gleaming in a streak of sunshine. Oh, I brought it away as a souvenir, and Niles kept the other trinkets. But you said harm was foretold to the possessor of those scarlet seeds, persisted the girl, whose fancy was excited by the tale, and who fancied all was not told. Among his spoils, Niles found a bit of parchment, which he deciphered, and this inscription said that the mummy we had so ungallantly burned was that of a famous sorceress, who bequeathed her curse to whoever should disturb her rest. Of course, I don't believe that curse has anything to do with it, but it's a fact that Niles never prospered from that day. He says it's because he has never recovered from the fall and fright, and I dare say it is so. But I sometimes wonder if I am to share the curse, for I've a vein of superstition in me, and that poor little mummy haunts my dreams still. A long silence followed these words. Paul painted mechanically, and Evelyn lay regarding him with a thoughtful face. But gloomy fancies were as foreign to her nature as shadows are to noonday, and presently she laughed a cheery laugh, saying as she took up the box again, "Why don't you plant them and see what wondrous flower they will bear?" "I doubt if they would bear anything after lying in a mummy's hand for centuries," replied Forsyth gravely. "Let me plant them and try. You know wheat has sprouted and grown that was taken from a mummy's coffin. Why should not these pretty seeds? I should so like to watch them grow. May I, Paul?" "No, I'd rather leave that experiment untried. I have a queer feeling about the matter, and I don't want to meddle myself or let anyone I love meddle with these seeds. They may be some horrible poison or possess some evil power, for the sorceress evidently valued them, since she clutched them fast even in her tomb. Now you are foolishly superstitious, and I laugh at you. Be generous. Give me one seed, just to learn if it will grow. See, I'll pay you for it," said Evelyn, who now stood beside him, dropped a kiss on his forehead as she made her request with the most engaging air. But Forsyth would not yield. He smiled and returned the embrace with lover-like warmth, then flung the seeds into the fire and gave her back the golden box, saying tenderly, "My darling, I'll fill it with diamonds or bonbons if you please, but I will not let you play with that witch's spells. You've enough of your own, so forget the pretty seeds and see what a light of the harem I've made of you." Evelyn frowned and smiled, and presently the lovers were out in the spring sunshine, reveling in their own happy hopes, untroubled by one foreboding fear. Part 2. "I have a little surprise for you, love," said Forsyth as he greeted his cousin 3 months later on the morning of his wedding day. "And I have one for you," she answered, smiling faintly. "How pale you are, and how thin you grow. All this bridal bustle is too much for you, Evelyn," he said with fond anxiety as he watched the strange pallor of her face and pressed the wasted little hand in his. "I'm so tired," she said, and leaned her head wearily on her lover's breast. "Neither sleep, food, nor air gives me strength, and a curious mist seems to cloud my mind at times. Mamma says it is the heat, but I shiver even in the sun, while at night I burn with fever. Paul, dear, I'm glad you are going to take me away to lead a quiet, happy life with you, but I'm afraid it will be a very short one." "My fanciful little wife, you are tired and nervous with all this worry, but a few weeks of rest in the country will give us back our blooming Eve again. Have you no curiosity to learn my surprise?" he asked to change her thoughts. The vacant look stealing over the girl's face gave place to one of interest, but as she listened, it seemed to require an effort to fix her mind on her lover's words. "You remember the day we rummaged in the old cabinet?" "Yes," and a smile touched her lips for a moment. "And how you wanted to plant those queer red seeds I stole from the mummy?" "I remember," and her eyes kindled with sudden fire. "Well, I tossed them into the fire, as I thought, and gave you the box. But when I went back to cover up my picture and found one of those seeds on the rug, a sudden fancy to gratify your whim led me to send it to Niles and ask him to plant and report on its progress. Today I hear from him for the first time, and he reports that the seed has grown marvelously, has budded, and that he intends to take the first flower, if it blooms in time, to a meeting of famous scientific men, after which he will send me its true name and the plant itself. From his description, it must be very curious, and I'm impatient to see it. You need not wait. I can show you the flower in its bloom. And Evelyn beckoned with the méchant smile so long a stranger to her lips. Much amazed, Forsyth followed her to her own little boudoir, and there, standing in the sunshine, was the unknown plant. Almost rank in their luxuriance were the vivid green leaves on the slender purple stems, and rising from the midst, one ghostly white flower, shaped like the head of a hooded snake, with scarlet stamens like forked tongues, and on the petals glittered spots like dew. A strange, uncanny flower. Has it any odor? Asked Forsyth, bending to examine it and forgetting in his interest to ask how it came there. None, and that disappoints me. I'm so fond of perfumes, answered the girl, caressing the green leaves which trembled at her touch, while the purple stems deepened their tint. Now tell me about it, said Forsyth, after standing silent for several minutes. I had been before you and secured one of the seeds, for two fell on the rug. I planted it under a glass in the richest soil I could find, watered it faithfully, and was amazed at the rapidity with which it grew when once it appeared above the earth. I told no one, for I meant to surprise you with it. But this bud has been so long in blooming, I have had to wait. It is a good omen that it blossoms today, and as it is nearly white, I mean to wear it, for I have learned to love it, having been my pet for so long. I would not wear it, for, in spite of its innocent color, it is an evil-looking plant, with its adder's tongue and unnatural dew. Wait till Niles tells us what it is, then pet it if it is harmless. Perhaps my sorceress cherished it for some symbolic beauty. Those old Egyptians were full of fancies. It was very sly of you to turn the tables on me this way, but I forgive you, since in a few hours I shall chain this mysterious hand forever. How cold it is! Come out into the garden and get some warmth and color for tonight, my love. But when night came, no one could reproach the girl with her pallor, for she glowed like a pomegranate flower. Her eyes were full of fire, her lips scarlet, and all her old vivacity seemed to have returned. A more brilliant bride never blushed under a misty veil, and when her lover saw her, he was absolutely startled by the almost unearthly beauty which transformed the pale, languid creature of the morning into this radiant woman. They were married, and if love, many blessings, and all good gifts lavishly showered upon them could make them happy, then this young pair were truly blessed. But even in the rapture of the moment that made her his, Forsyth observed how icy cold was the little hand he held, how feverish the deep color on the soft cheek he kissed, and what a strange fire burned in the tender eyes that looked so wistfully at him. Blithe and beautiful as a spirit, the smiling bride played her part in all the festivities of that long evening, and when at last life, and color began to fade, the loving eyes that watched her thought it but the natural weariness of the hour. As the last guest departed, Forsyth was met by a servant who gave him a letter marked, "Haste." Tearing it open, he read these lines from a friend of the professor's. Dear Sir, poor Niles died suddenly 2 days ago while at the scientific club, and his last words were, "Tell Paul Forsyth to beware of the mummy's curse, for this fatal flower has killed me." The circumstances of his death were so peculiar that I add them as a sequel to this message. For several months, as he told us, he had been watching an unknown plant, and that evening he brought us the flower to examine. Other matters of interest absorbed us till a late hour, and the plant was forgotten. The professor wore it in his buttonhole, a strange white serpent-headed blossom with pale glittering spots, which slowly changed to a glittering scarlet, till the leaves looked as if sprinkled with blood. It was observed that instead of the pallor and feebleness which had recently come over him, that the professor was unusually animated and seemed in an almost unnatural state of high spirits. Near the close of the meeting, in the midst of a lively discussion, he suddenly dropped, as if smitten with apoplexy. He was conveyed home insensible, and after one lucid interval in which he gave me the message I have recorded above, he died in great agony, raving of mummies, pyramids, serpents, and some fatal curse which had fallen upon him. After his death, livid scarlet spots like those on the flower appeared upon his skin, and he shriveled like a withered leaf. At my desire, the mysterious plant was examined and pronounced by the best authority one of the most deadly poisons known to the Egyptian sorceresses. The plant slowly absorbs the vitality of whoever cultivates it, and the blossom, worn for 2 or 3 hours, produces either madness or death. Down dropped the paper from Forsyth's hand. He read no further, but hurried back into the room where he had left his young wife. As if worn out with fatigue, she had thrown herself upon a couch and lay there motionless, her face half hidden by the light folds of the veil which had blown over it. "Evelyn, my dearest, wake up and answer me. Did you wear that strange flower today?" whispered Forsyth, putting the misty screen away. There was no need for her to answer, for there, gleaming spectrally on her bosom, was the evil blossom, its white petals spotted now with flecks of scarlet, vivid as drops of newly spilt blood. But the unhappy bridegroom scarcely saw it, for the face above it appalled him by its utter vacancy. Drawn and pallid, as if with some wasting malady, the young face, so lovely an hour ago, lay before him, aged and blighted by the baleful influence of the plant which had drunk up her life. No recognition in the eyes, no word upon the lips, no motion of the hand, only the faint breath, the fluttering pulse, and wide open eyes betrayed that she was alive. Alas for the young wife! The superstitious fear at which she had smiled had proved true. The curse that had bided its time for ages was fulfilled at last, and her own hand wrecked her happiness forever. Death in life was her doom, and for years Forsyth secluded himself to tend with pathetic devotion the pale ghost who never, by word or look, could thank him for the love that outlived even such a fate as this. That was Lost in the Pyramid or The Mummy's Curse by Louisa May Alcott. It was written in 1869. It's a good one, right? I like this book, these old creepy stories. So yesterday I tried to read The Lady with Carnations. And all right, so, and I didn't get to finish because the internet was crummy, but I think I'm going to finish right now because I kind of know from my dad, or at least I know where my dad got cut off. If you heard the whole thing yesterday, don't come back. If you did not hear it yesterday, you can hear the first half. Go look at it, and I'll finish for today. It's for you, Dad. I threw my window open, leaning out and looking at the moon-enchanted sea, and inhaling the exquisite fragrance of the carnations wafted to me on every breath of the night wind. I thought of many things: the glory of life, the large benevolence of nature, the mystery of death, the beauty and certainty of immortality, and then, though my back was turned to the interior of my room, I felt I was no longer alone. I forced myself to move around from the window, slowly but determinedly. I brought myself to confront whoever it was that had thus entered through my locked door, and I was scarcely surprised when I saw the lady with the carnations standing at a little distance from me, with a most woebegone, appealing expression on her shadowy, lovely face. I looked at her, resolved not to fear her, and then brought all my will to bear on unraveling the mystery of my strange visitant. As I met her gaze unflinchingly, she made a sort of timid gesture with her hands, as though she besought something. "Why are you here?" I asked in a low, clear tone. "Why do you follow me?" Again, she made that little appealing movement. Her answer, soft as a child's whisper, floated through the room. "You pitied me." "Are you unhappy?" "Very." And here she clasped her wan white fingers together in a sort of agony. I was growing nervous, but I continued. "Tell me, then, what you wish me to do." She raised her eyes in passionate supplication. "Pray for me. No one has prayed for me ever since I died. No one has pitied me for 100 years." "How did you die?" I asked, trying to control the rapid beating of my heart. The lady with carnation smiled most mournfully and slowly unfastened the cluster of flowers from her breast. There, her white robe was darkly stained with blood. She pointed to the stain and then replaced the flowers. I understood. "Murdered," I whispered, more to myself than to my pale visitor. "Murdered." "No one knows and no one prays for me," wailed the faint, sweet spirit voice. "And though I am dead, I cannot rest. Pray for me. I am tired." And her slender head drooped wearily. She seemed about to vanish. I conquered my rising terrors by a strong effort and said, "Tell me, you must tell me." Here she raised her head, and her large, pensive eyes met mine obediently. "Who was your murderer?" "He did not mean it," she answered. "He loved me. It was here." And she raised one hand and motioned toward the adjacent studio. "Here he drew my picture. He thought me false, but I was true. Manon, que perfide. Oh, no, no, no. It should be Manon, que fidèle." She paused and looked at me appealingly. Again, she pointed to the studio. Go and see, she sighed. Then you will pray, and I will never come again. Promise you will pray for me. It was here he killed me, and I died without a prayer. Where were you buried? Buried, I asked in a hushed voice. In the waves, she murmured, thrown in the wild, cold waves, and no one knew, no one ever found poor Manon, alone and sad for 100 years, with no word said to God for her. Her face was so full of plaintive pathos that I would have wept. Watching her as she stood, I knelt at the quaint old prie-dieu, just within my reach, and prayed as she desired. Slowly, 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 a rapturous light came into her eyes. She smiled and waved her hands toward me in farewell. She glided backwards towards the door, and her figure grew dim and indistinct. For the last time, she turned her now radiant countenance upon me and said in thrilling accents, Right, Manon, que fidèle. Faithful heart. I cannot remember how the rest of the night passed, but I know that with the early morning, rousing myself from the stupor of sleep into which I had fallen, I hurried to the door of the studio. It was ajar. I pushed it boldly open and entered. The room was long and lofty, but destitute of all furniture save a battered-looking, worm-eaten easel that leaned up against the damp-stained wall. I approached this relic of the painter's art and, examining it closely, perceived the name Manon, cut roughly yet deeply upon it. Looking curiously about, I saw what had nearly escaped my notice, a sort of hanging cupboard on the left-hand side of the large central bay window. I tried its handle. It was unlocked and opened easily. Within it lay three things: a palette, on which the blurring marks of long obliterated pigments were still faintly visible, a dagger, unsheathed with its blade almost black with rust, and the silver filigree sticks of a fan to which clung some moldy shreds of yellow lace. I remembered the fan the lady with the carnations had carried at the Théâtre Français, and I pieced together her broken story. She had been slain by her artist lover, slain in a sudden fit of jealousy, ere the soft colors on his picture of her were yet dry, murdered in this very studio, and no doubt that hidden dagger was the weapon used. Poor Manon! Her frail body had been cast from the high rock on which the chateau stood into the wild, cold waves, as she or her spirit had said, and her cruel lover had carried his wrath against her so far as to perpetuate a slander against her by writing que perfide on that imperishable block of stone. Full of pitying thoughts, I shut the cupboard and slowly left the studio, closing the door noiselessly after me. That morning, as soon as I could get Mrs. Fairley alone, I told her my adventure, beginning with the very first experience I had had of the picture in the Louvre. Needless to say, she heard me with the utmost incredulity. I know you, my dear, she said, shaking her head at me wisely. You are full of fancies and always dreaming about the next world. As if this one wasn't good enough for you. The whole thing is a delusion. But, I persisted, you know the studio was shut and locked. How is it that it is open now? It isn't open, declared Mrs. Fairley, though I am quite willing to believe you dreamt it was. Come and see, I exclaimed eagerly, and I took her upstairs, though she was somewhat reluctant to follow me. As I had said, the studio was open. I led her in and showed her the name cut on the easel and the hanging cupboard with its contents. As these convincing proofs of my story met her eyes, she shivered a little and grew rather pale. "Come away," she said nervously. "You are really too horrid. I can't bear this sort of thing. For goodness sake, keep your ghosts to yourself." I saw she was vexed and pettish, and I readily followed her out of the barren, forlorn-looking room. Scarcely were we well outside the door when it shut to with a sharp click. I tried it. It was fast locked. This was too much for Mrs. Fairley. She rushed downstairs in the perfect paroxysm of terror, and when I found her in the breakfast room, she declared she would not stop another day in the house. I managed to calm her fears, however, but she insisted on my remaining with her to brave out whatever else might happen at what she persisted now in calling the haunted chateau, in spite of her practical theories. And so I stayed on. And when we left Brittany, we left altogether, without having had our peace disturbed by any more manifestations of an unearthly nature. One thing alone troubled me a little. I should have liked to obliterate the word perfide from that stone and to have had fidèle carved on it instead. But it was too deeply engraved for this. However, I have seen no more of the lady with the carnations. But I know the dead need praying for, and that they often suffer for lack of such prayers, though I cannot pretend to explain the reason why. And I know that the picture in the Louvre is not a Greuze, though it is called one. It is the portrait of a faithful woman deeply wronged, and her name is here written as she told me to write it. Manon, que fidèle. So that is the second half of The Lady with Carnations. What that means to that is The Lady with Carnations from Marie Corelli. It's funny that my dad just wrote me a word I can't read. You know, I do pre-read things, and I actually look words up, and I work really hard at clear pronunciation, and yet I still stumble. You know, it's that out loud thing, right? I can practice the word, but then when it's in the sentence or it's hyphenated and it's on the next line down, that really can throw me. So again, always my apologies for anything that I have stumbled through or mispronounced, and especially the French in this one. The French in this is, so it's Manon is her name, and it's que fidèle. Que is heart. So so let me think. So it's treacherous heart is que, what does she write it first? What's the treacherous heart? Hold on, let me see if I can find it. Oh shoot. One second. What does she say? Oh, darn. So treacherous heart. And what she says is, no, it should read faithful heart. Que fidèle. It should read faithful heart. I can't read where the... Oh, here it is. Right, Manon, que fidèle, which is faithful heart. But where does he say it is? Oh, my gosh. It's right here. I can see the footnote, but I can't find the spot where the footnote replies to. I know I'm on the page because the footnote is on this page. Oh, that's terrible. I'm sorry to waste your time here. Oh, here it is. It's because it's in the middle of the page, not in the set. It's que perfide. Que que perfide, with an exclamation point, treacherous heart. And she says, no, 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 right Manon, que fidèle, faithful heart. She was misunderstood and murdered. Okay. Yeah, so there you have it. Another great one from this book. I like this book, but I'm leaving it here because I have things to read from at home tomorrow. I'll see you then for a Sunday edition of Frankenstein Tea. Thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks for listening. Love you, Poppy. If Mom's there, I love you too. Peace out.